We're live with the Game Theory Podcast. Nights.
Yeah, we're doing it at night today, just like Troy and Abed's occasional Troy and Abed in the morning nights. I love Donald Glover's face when he says the word nights. That's makes me miss him so much.
Oh man, I need to look for that next time. I don't think I noticed.
Oh, he's got the perfect comedic delivery, just the way he does his mouth. He's all like happy, Troy and Abed in the morning, and then his face gets all serious. Nights.
Yeah, that guy has great delivery in general. Oh man. Anyway, so welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. This is episode 117? 117. Let me double check. Yes, 117. So we've been doing this a while, man. It's 120 episodes.
Hard to keep track.
Jeez. Man, getting old. I wonder if we visibly aged in the videos.
I think we have. I've got my spectacles on now. My old man.
Yeah. Yeah. Next time I'm going to podcast with my cane on the entire time.
And your dentures.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So we are recording a little bit early because I'm actually leaving town this weekend. I'm going to go on a run called the Hot Chocolate Run.
Whoa.
Which sounds awesome, but it's only called Hot Chocolate because it's so cold. You need something hot to drink at the end, probably medically. So that'll be fun.
Yeah. Weather's always a really interesting topic. So
let's talk about that.
It is weird that you're getting the snowy, wintry weather in Mississippi, and I'm getting weird 40-degree weeks here in Colorado. But whatever, climate change. What can you do?
Maybe.
Yeah, or just natural cycles of God's plan. So could go either way.
Either way, it could be either one. But seriously, yeah, our weather's screwed right now. We just had some like tornadoes and now snow. I like snow better than tornadoes, but still weird.
It's a bold stance.
Yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and put it on the line, David.
All right. Well, you'll field the hate mail.
So this week, we had some activity on the Facebook page, but it was mostly about Anita Sarkeesian, and then the tone of how would you put that, David? How would you put that?
The tone that we use when discussing Anita Sarkeesian.
Yes.
Or the tone that took place in the Facebook conversation.
Either.
I think that the tone we use is constructive criticism, maybe. Mm-hmm. We tend to be a little academic, and we've been told that maybe academic is not the right tone for a YouTube video, but that's just I guess we hold the standard that we're used to thinking in for everybody. So maybe we're wrong to do that, but that is why it's our show. So that's the tone that we tend to use for everything that we encounter if you've been listening for a while. I do want to give kudos to our Facebook community, though, for that conversation. I've seen discussions about Anita Sarkeesian or even just feminism in general on the internet take a very ugly turn very quickly, become very toxic, and just lots of vitriol, if I can borrow that word, spewed on each side. However, our community was very mature and very, I don't know. It was a good conversation that nobody became ugly or spiteful in.
Yeah. I should just say that in college classrooms, I've seen less, even over simple things like climate change, people were like, hey, how about this? Fuck you. And I was like, wow, we are taking a break. How about that?
Yeah.
That's kind of heated. So a sensitive subject.
It's a sensitive subject that we managed to, and by we I mean our community managed to keep from becoming heated or toxic. So kudos for discussing something with the maturity that is not often granted to gamers. I think sometimes we paint with a broad brush, and that was one of the criticisms that didn't quite resonate with me, is that you cannot bring these topics up without a hate mob forming. And while that might be true on 4chan or YouTube or on the internet in general, I think that at least in the close-knit community that we've sort of built over the past couple of years, we have proven that we are able to have that kind of discussion without it becoming ugly. So congratulations, everyone.
Yeah, and I'm glad people from every side of everything, every viewpoint could, say whatever they wanted to say, and it didn't feel like
there were disagreements, but it was never felt like attacks. It was like, oh, I see why you would think that, but I also think this, and then just sort of very, very mature. I was impressed.
Yeah, and the weird thing is I expected that. I didn't know I expected it until afterwards as it started going.
Yeah, that is weird, because usually when I see those things pop up in other forums or other Facebook things, I'm like, oh, this is going to blow up. And I get the popcorn out, like this is going to be really ugly. But when I saw that, my initial, as a moderator of the group, my initial thought wasn't like, oh shit, I better be ready with some moderation here. I was just like, I'm at work right now. I think this is going to play out just fine. I'll just check it when I get home, and it did play out just fine.
Yeah, that was awesome. Like, I thought the same thing because, like, normally I do that. Like, normally on Facebook in general, someone says something about any sensitive subject, like Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, something along those lines, or like or race or any of the hot topics, even politics, and I'm just like, when I get that feeling. But no, this time I was like, that's a good point. Yeah, let's see what the community thinks. So man, I couldn't say good enough about this. Everyone was awesome. So. Cool, good shit. But one little point, I do disagree that there can't be academic material on YouTube. Like, I think that if someone is going to put themselves forth and say, here are points in any regard,
especially if you put yourself forward as someone credentialed, someone who, a pop culture expert or a pop culture theorist or any kind of, like, she uses her academic credentials to kind of give her argument weight. So I do think at that point, having gone through grad school, she should be used to that level of criticism. So I don't think it's unfair. It's not like, a movie critic or someone reviewing a game saying, I didn't like this game because there wasn't enough explosions. Like, there is, when you put yourself in an academic tone, then you should be able to have an academic discussion about it, which I think we do.
Yeah, and no matter what, it can never hurt. Like, if somebody is like reviewing a toy and they're like, I like the curvature on the shoulders, and you're like, actually, I kind of found the curvature bad. If you look at all the other ones, take the whole mass and look at them, it's actually one of the outliers that's a little pointy on the shoulder. And if they're like, yeah, hey bro, I'm not really looking for that, then it's like, oh, okay. But they're never like, what in the fuck? Like, nobody does that.
I do think that, and this might just be my weirdly random libertarian side coming through, but I do tend to really push back against any attempt at turning off critical discussion or critical thought, even if it's no matter what the subject. So I do think that Aeneas Sarkeesian, Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, whoever the character is, you should be able to have an academic and a logical discussion about their position without feeling like there's a sacred cow or there's something off limits to talk about. And I know that's not the position everyone shares on the show, but that is my position as one of the hosts. So if that's not to your cup of tea, I understand, but that's kind of how I come across it, or I approach the situation.
Yeah. But anyway, our show is not about that. And I just want to give everyone kudos and just bring that to light. Good stuff. But yeah, this time we're talking about something that was linked on the Facebook page that we both thought was pretty interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, the cognitive threshold of gaming. It sounds very jargony.
Sounds very cognitive.
Yeah, threshold. Yeah, so graphs are awesome. Like, everybody loves graphs. It collects information, it organizes it in a way that makes sense to us because we are visual creatures. If you can, like, a best way to remember something is to use visual imagery. The best way to prepare for an activity, like if we do sports psychology, is visual imagery. The best way to calm yourself, visual imagery. Not the best way, but the best. One of the best abortive things that you can do, which means cutting off the bad feeling. Oh, there's so much the visual imagery does for us, right?
Yes,
like, we are clearly organized in our brain to prefer visual data. So graphs are awesome. So this is one of these things that really helps make sense of a lot of things. And so basically it's this graph, right? So you got an x-axis and y-axis, which means sideways and up. Everyone's seen one of these. And then it says going up and down. So it's like, oh, the ones that are low. So the y-axis, the one going up and down, says excitement. So things are, if it's high up on the graph, if it's way up on near the ceiling, it's exciting. If it's way low down the ground, it's something a little slower, like Othello or backgammon. No one's speeding through that, right?
And the author of this study, Nick Yee, he's clarified that excitement, a better word might have been pacing or velocity. Just in other words, like frequency of like things happening.
Yeah, which I agree with. Yeah. And then on the x-axis, so the one going like lengthwise, so like starting on the left, going to the right. It's skill, or what was it? Was the skill? Strategy. Okay. Yeah. All right. So which was another thing we will have to define that because it's not too well. It's hard to tell from right where we're sitting, but yeah. So on the left, it's not a whole lot of strategy. To the right, it's like a whole lot of strategy.
Right. And just reading the comments where he clarifies these terms, when he says strategy, he's talking about meaningful decision points and complexity. So like a game, like on the left, let's see one of the games on the left on strategy, Coaster Tycoon. There's a couple things that you can do, but overall it's not that complex. Like if you do these certain things, it's going to happen. But further to the right, you have games like Total War, XCOM, where there's a lot more branching trees and different things, different knobs to tweak and twiddle with.
Hmm. Yeah. And excitement or volume of input, kind of like edge of your seats type stuff. Something low on there would be like Chivalry, the game. Maybe not the combat, but the overworld part, right? Or
Or
Rome.
Civilization, where it's a kind of a slower turn-based kind of game.
Yeah, like you can really just kind of just sit there and just kind of hang out with the game. And
Or
then,
SimCity.
SimCity, yeah. And the ones that are really high would be things like Counter-Strike, right? Like you can't just be like, hang on, guys, give me a couple
Pause
seconds.
real quick. Yeah.
To the bathroom, and just like walk off. People for every second you're away, there's something on the line.
Games where frame rate really matter and reaction time are really important would be high excitement or high velocity or high intensity.
Right.
High pacing, I think, is probably the word I would have used.
Yeah. So, and basically, there was an interesting, like, as you look at this, and we'll provide the link. Actually, it's in the Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
There is games that are, organize themselves all around here, but you see all of them clustering around the bottom left-hand side. So, like, if you cut it right in half, like from a diagonal, so starting the diagonal would be starting from the top left side, it'd be touching that super high excitement but low strategy side, and then cut it down as an angle like your Leonardo, slice it down all the way to high strategy, low excitement. Then that top whole right side, that whole top right triangle is like almost completely barren.
Yeah, there's very few that even touch into that. There's only two that actually cross that threshold, which he calls the cognitive threshold, which he defines as, well, he doesn't define it, but he identifies it as the place where games are simply not fun anymore. And what's his theory for why they're not fun anymore?
So, gaming, man, all the game designers know this. It's hard to dial in how hard a game is, and there's a lot that goes in how hard it is, too. I mean, we're preaching to the choir with the game designers there. But, like what makes something hard? Oh, velocity of input, like they were saying, like the excitement, What if it's too much? I can't handle it. Like you can never, if you play a computer in StarCraft, you can never beat them because there's a skill cap. It's just a human cap up there, right? Whereas like some game like, well, chess may be actually one of those too. But games that are like, and what's a good one? Well, actually turn-based games, where you have to wait your turn. It's not quite there. So I think the interesting part...
he kind of makes a distinction between easy fun and hard fun. So the further left you are on the graph is kind of what they call the easy fun thing. These are games like SimCity, Football Manager, tycoon games. These are games where you're probably not going to lose, but you're going to have fun. It's low strategy, low excitement, but you're still having a good time.
Yeah, right? like Cards Against Humanity, or like Apples to Apples, or something like that. Yeah,
right. Or Sims 4 would probably be a game I would rate as easy fun. Right, like you can't really lose; you're just having a good time. And then in the middle, they call it balanced fun. So now you're getting higher excitement and higher strategy, but it's still not so hard that it's frustrating. So this is he's got Heroes of the Storm is in there, XCOM, Heroes of Might and Magic, World of Tanks, and then the last band is hard fun. This is where you're getting right up against that cognitive threshold, where the excitement's really high and the strategy's really high, and these are games like Counter-Strike, League of Legends, StarCraft. These games are to the point where it's very demanding, either strategically, like with Europa Universalis, where there's just so many knobs and buttons to twiddle with, or reflex-wise, like reaction time, like Counter-Strike, where you just have to be really fast and play a lot to get good at that game, to be competitive. But then the line beyond that is the cognitive threshold, where we don't see a lot of games because at that point, either the pacing's too fast or the strategy's too high to where it's no longer a fun game. It's the theory here why we don't see games there.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, like so he kind of, he's saying that like if you make a game too hard or too much volume, so as you're looking at this slice from the corner to the side, if you make it high volume and high strategy, well, that's going to be hard. That won't even be hard fun. It'll cross the threshold and it'll be too demanding. You won't be able to play it. So something that has all the knobs and whistles of Europa Universalis, yeah. But you turned it up and you've got to catch up to a computer who's hitting the turn button and you have your own independent turn button and it's getting to like, whatever. The point is that over time it's way overtaking you and you could just never outperform that. You could never live up to that standard. That's like the point he's making is that this helps us organize games and figure out like what it is that that puts them right up on the different edges. And he was saying that it's kind of predictive for what kind of market you can market someone towards. Like, oh, do you like games like this? Hey, maybe it sounds like you liked the high cognitive load, while as well, being pretty demanding on strategy. Well, I'd say the whole thing's cognitive load. So strategy, and then also kind of twitch reflexes.
Yeah, this is actually, I guess we should talk a little bit about the methodology here, because part of good science is that you can make predictions based on what the model's predicting and it would come true. And so the way they put this together, they didn't just arbitrarily throw dots on a board. They actually have a survey that we can talk about later where it rates you on what you value in a game. Do you value like fast reaction time, shooting people? Do you value making it deliberate decisions? And you can rank it from not at all value to extremely value and everything in between. It's like one of those 5-point scales, I think.
Yeah.
And what they did was they did that, and then they looked at what kind of games these guys liked, and they charted them that way. So and that's kind of how the points are out of the board. So if you were really into turn-based, like slow, deliberate things, but not that into high intensity or high excitement, and your favorite game is Europa Universalis, that influences where it ends up on this chart. And then they predicted that games that were similar would be close together on the chart, and that's what we see actually happening. Like Heroes of Storm, League of Legends, and Dota are all kind of in the same quadrant. StarCraft is near Command and Conquer. Transport Tycoon is near SimCity, which is near Football Manager. So like the prediction did come true in that games that were similar feeling ended up similar the way the data put them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is interesting. I think that's pretty cool. Yeah. And it's useful. Like anything that's like mildly useful, like even psychodynamic is useful, right? Like it can be. It's completely not backed by science. But if you say something like, I feel really angry, and they're like, oh, let's talk about your childhood, right? Like it's Freudian stuff. That's what psychodynamic is. And you go, okay, and you start talking about your childhood. And just that simple distraction of talking about your childhood made you forget your worries, and you're like, I guess I am better for a little bit. But then you find yourself coming every week because it's just a weekly distraction and you haven't realized that yet because the guy thinks it's not. He thinks it's fixing you. Then you might find yourself in therapy for 3 to 4 years, which is the norm for psychodynamic. In fact, they argue for it. But you find yourself not getting any better over time. You just kind of hiccuping up like this. So it's the same thing here. Like it's useful for what? And I think for this, it's useful to like help you find maybe other games. And also it's a cool way to look at like different versions of gamers, right? Like
and also from a game design perspective, it's useful to know what you're aiming for in a game, because with these bands they say like a hard fun game would be demanding and unforgiving and designed to like really make you tap all of your your cognitive resources is what they call it. The balanced fun uses a moderate amount of strategic complexity, so it's designed to encourage thoughtfulness without being demanding on your cognitive resources. And then the easy fun band encourage more free-form creative play where being strategic is an asset but not a requirement. So knowing what kind of audience you're building for and what kind of things you want to tap into is I think that will help you as a game designer, just knowing like, okay, well, if we want this to be easy fun, we should probably dial back some of the strategy or some of the velocity, right?
Yeah.
So like, if I'm designing a game for Jeremiah, I'm going to crank both of those knobs up a little bit because he's more into the hard fun kind of games. Like I'm looking at those games, and they're games like Heroes of Storm is near there, StarCraft is there. Like those are the kind of games that appeal to your style of gamer, where you really like to kind of tax yourself.
Yeah,
like squeeze the most out. Like remember APM? Like you just want to get like as fast as possible at those like tasks that you're doing because you want to maximize your performance, and that's where games in the hard fun category shine.
Yeah, which is cool. So yeah, I think overall it's a pretty cool system. I do have some criticisms, but I'm waiting to move into them, and I'm thinking about the good stuff. And it's that like it's a theory, it's a cool theory, and it organizes data, which I like. Theories that do that, awesome. Unless there's something better, then
they've had over 140,000 gamers respond. I mean, it's a self-response survey, so that might be one of your criticisms. Is that's not always the most accurate because we don't always know why we like games. Or why we play them.
You're already getting to it.
Yeah, should we go ahead and move in the criticism though, so I don't step on your toes?
No. I wasn't trying to censor you. I was actually saying, you get like an honorary degree.
I was just, as I was saying, I was like, oh, that's probably one of the problems he has with it because self-report data is not the most reliable.
So gaming motivation, this I knew about this from my thesis because I almost used it as just a measure to throw in there.
The gamer motivation profile?
Yeah, and so we are it's called gaming motivation at the time. We always called it the survey, but it's the same questions as I was looking through it. So I don't know if that's just a misnomer, like we called it wrong when we used it, but I got it from a guy in our department who had been looking at World of Warcraft motivation, like what's the point of playing it, that kind of thing. And I knew that it was highly had a ton of data points to it. You know, it's a large sample size. So yeah, and I think it's interesting. I think it's cool that it can let you tap into that, and there's nothing better than that right now. So it's the best of what we got, which is awesome. But here's some criticism. So like, first of all, I'll do should I do the nitpicking first? Maybe I should do the nitpicking first. Here's the big stuff.
Yeah, we'll end on a big stuff thing, and it'll be more dramatic that way.
Simple nitpicking. This would be like, so you're playing like Heroes of the Storm, right? Which is considered a balanced fun, and I'd say that's probably right. I guess like. It's not. I don't think it's as well. Okay, so there are characters. If you play like a Rainer or like someone who's like considered a medium character or like an easy character, I think that's right. But like if you play like an Abathur, I'd be hard pressed to find someone who plays Lost Vikings or Abathur who thinks that it's an easy game or doesn't completely tax you, because it definitely touches. That's why I like playing those characters. It touches to the very top of those.
But remember, these aren't necessarily games they've ever played. They're not judging the game based on its complexity. They're judging it based on the kinds of people who like that game. So what they're saying is the kinds of people that like that game, overall, there's more people playing the Rainers than the Abathurs probably, which is why it's a little bit on the left side of that line.
Yeah, I wonder if that's true. I think, I mean, like I said, this part's nitpicking is simply that it's difficult to put any one game. Like, this is what I like about modern games. Or we talked about this with Mario 3D World. You can get in and you can play it at a competitive level, like Smash Brothers. You can play it at a competitive level, or you can turn all the items on and kind of fuck around. So I like that you can. I think this would be a cool way if they did it. You can make charts like this where you make a band. You know, like you do like a confidence interval, and then you put the normal data point. You're like, oh, here's all the variance within that game, and then here's the centroid, right?
Right.
And
so if they'd done that, we would probably have a little bit different of a graph. But what this is measuring is like, here are the kinds of games. Here's the kind of gamers that like these games, and most of them fall on here are their preferences. And so it's probably not completely accurate of the game itself, but it's more of a reflection of the kinds of people who are filling out the survey who said Heroes of the Storm is their favorite game.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting about, so we'll get into like the methodology, I guess, before I talk about the philosophical type things, but the methodology, so I'd be curious of whether somebody, like if I had someone play one game with them and I played co-op, right, I maximized the chance they could like the experience, and then I played some game that was like super fast and that they were good at, they could establish mastery and pleasure, which are two like important factors whenever you're doing a behavior that to predict whether you might enjoy it. And so like meaningful enjoyment, so it lasts. And so is that those two things. So if I allowed them to display that and then they played it, I wonder if that wouldn't skew their self-report if they took it right afterwards. You know, I suspect they would. And then in which case they'd say, what's your favorite games? And you've already primed them because that's the first thing they ask, right? It's like me saying, like, think real hard about your favorite game. And then you're like, what's my favorite games? And they're like, what are some recent games you played? We already asked you what your all-time favorite games are. So that might be skewing what your favorite games are too, or what your current favorite games are. And then you put those down, and then it's like, now we're going to ask you some games that you like. And it's like, well, you just primed them by asking them what games they like. You can't ask them and then ask them quantifiable data there. You've got to, what you should do is ABA test it. So like you get some people you ask that one question about, sometimes you ask these other questions, and then you look at all those, or test one, test two. But because we know that this will get skewed.
Yeah, and for those of you who hadn't taken the survey yet, the way it's set up is they ask you a lot of questions about what you enjoy doing in games, and then the very last thing they do is they ask you what your 3 favorite games are overall, and then what are 3 recent games you're playing that you're enjoying.
Right, and so the reason why I'm not entirely convinced by this is because, okay, so whenever you answer questions like this is what's interesting. Like if you ask personality questions, or if you ask Myers-Briggs questions, what happens is someone gets like an idea of their mind, or if you ask themselves to say like, here's some questions about yourself. Tell me about yourself. There's a moment where we start answering questions, or this is the most common way that we found. The moment we start answering questions, and then you think of a version of you, right? Like ambitious you, or like maybe like lazy Saturday you. Like we have a lot of different
Oh yeah, that's why I cannot Myers-Briggs, because I'm just like, wait, what kind of me am I thinking of right now? Is it party me, or is it like wants to stay home and watch Netflix me? Because I can be either of those people depending on my mood.
Exactly. And I tap into this a lot in therapy, like, because people will, whether it's marital therapy and someone's skewing the other person, I'm like, gosh, that person sounds like a monster. Well, I know we can all be monsters at times, but what about the good side? Or what about the good so-and-so? Or what about the good David? Or what about the ambitious David? And if you're like, I'm not ambitious, and I'm like, you run a podcast for fun, and we've done it for like 2 years now. You don't have to get up and do this. Why do you do it? Like, what's the point? And you're like, well, I guess I do have goals that I'm willing to work extra for. And I'm like, there you go. That's considered ambition. So, or whatever. Like, I'm trying to think of something that you may not think of yourself as. Like me, I wouldn't consider myself a quitter, but I quit all the time. I just don't think about that person. However, you can activate that semantic node in your mind, by simply like priming it, right? So like if I say, write about your biggest failure, and then you're like, oh shit, okay. And you write about your biggest failure, and then I'm like, tell me about you. Do you succeed at your goals? Like obviously that's going to skew what you see there. So by asking them about specific games and then asking them what kind of games they would like, that's the shittiest methodology I've ever seen. I'm like, what do you just primed them. This is psychology 101. You can't do that. You can't say like what's your favorite job?
Like if I put that I loved immersion, right? Like I was like, oh, I love being immersed in games. It's one thing I got ranked highly. And then it asked me my favorite games. I was already thinking Chrono Trigger because I was thinking RPGs. Yeah. Even though that might not be it usually is when I make a favorite game of all time list, but it might not be. But I was already thinking about role-playing games, so the first thing in my head was Chrono Trigger.
Exactly. Like, let's say I tell you to organize a list, especially not just the first one. Often we can just what we can do is just use stimulus response. Like if I say favorite food, and if you do a lightning round, and somebody goes sushi, or whatever, and they didn't think about how they organize their data. But if you make them make a list, a lot of times people go, oh man, let's see, and they have to think about it. I have to cut some games out and I have to select some games. What criteria are going to use? And pretty soon you're like, let's see. Long-lasting games, yeah, definitely. And you think of the first one, Chrono Trigger. Yeah, Chrono Trigger. What is it about that game? I was actually
thinking about one of our first episodes. We did our top 5 favorite games of all time. I don't know if you remember that. It's like one of our very first ones. Yeah. And so I was like, wait, which one did I list there? And I was like, what was it? Was it Wolf Among Us, or was it like The Walking Dead? Or like I was having a hard time remembering, so I just went with the old standby. Chrono Trigger.
Yeah, or Baby. Yeah. But and then as you're fleshing out the list, you're like, man, I got to come up with some kind of logic to cut some in, cut some out. Because then it's like, what's your favorite recent games too? And you're like, fuck, recent. Let me see. I played a lot of games recently. What does it mean by recent? I guess in the last year. So you're already coming up with your own parameters. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's kind of like, I want everybody to think of an animal that starts with O, and most people say ostrich or otter. You're already. This is how psychics work, right?
Oh, damn, I said orangutan.
Or orangutan.
They have funny faces.
Honestly, I don't know. But I'm saying, like, if I pull people and look at the most common ones, then I would hedge my bets there. And that's what they do. They don't pull people, but they do, they
go for the most common, like what pops up. And they're like, oh, there's 70% of people say ostrich. If I say this at a party, people think I'm awesome.
Yeah, so then they're like, how can I get them to not say ostrich or otter? Or, but I can make them say orangutan. What if you say, like, what's your favorite color? And it has to be a blend, like maybe yellow and another color. And most people might be like, oh, blue or
it's
green,
how those party
orange. Yeah, and then they're like orange, orangutan, because they said orange because they've already thinking about orangutan or whatever. Yeah. The point is that you can easily do this, these mind tricks to make people think you're psychic. People make hundreds of thousands of dollars doing this, and it's because of this right here, priming and knowing what your set is. And we're so bad at understanding when we're being railed in like that we honestly think we've arrived at that decision independently. And hence when the big reveal where they're like, you're all thinking of orangutan, you're like, oh, but
what sorcery is this?
Right. We don't know how we make decisions 90% of the time, but I'm telling you that this is going to skew your decision. So whenever you start looking at the criteria, you're going to start describing them according to the organizing data or the organizing principle you used early or the criteria you used. And if you don't, there are people that don't. Not everyone's the same, especially if you have been praised as being like an out of the box thinker previously. And so like that's how you creatively explore solutions now. Or if you're like an intuitive person where you're just like, I'm just going to go with my feels, and then you spend less time using or determining what the organizing data are, things like that, or the organizing criteria, I guess. But so I started reading the methodology and I was like, I can't do it. I'm obviously already thinking of a certain genre, and honestly, it depends on what mood I'm in. I just said one of my favorite games so far. One of the most notable games is Life is Strange, but I play Heroes of the Storm all the time. I don't really fall on any of these per se, and I don't agree that any of these games are specifically inside of any of these areas. Like, for example, Counter-Strike, I would not say does not have strategy. I think it has a ton of strategy, but I think the thing that you've done is that you've automated it. So you can make things. So this is my problem with the graph as well. So like we look at it and it's kind of like these Texas sharpshooter fallacy, right? Mm-hmm. Which if nobody knows what that is, it's this. It's a drunk guy at a bar drinking whiskey right next to this other guy, and he goes, I'm the greatest shot in the world. And the other cowboy says, "Are you joking me? How? You can't be the greatest shot in the world, and you've had a lot of drinks." He goes, "I've had like 13 bourbon whiskeys over the course of the day. I can still hit a bullseye from 100 yards, and guaranteed." The guy's like, I don't believe you. Then, the drunk cowboy says, "I'll tell you what, I put $600 on the line." And then the sober cowboy says, "Yeah."
Elaborate backstory for this fallacy I've ever heard.
Oh, you haven't heard this? Oh, this is my favorite.
Whenever someone's explaining it to me, they always go right to the punch, and I've never heard the backstory.
I like to, man, you know me, I'm a storyteller. I like to build it.
All right, so $600 on the line, which is a lot in old Western times.
Yes, this dude finishes the shot, pulls up his spurs. I'm really going ham, aren't I?
Yeah, he really paint the picture. I want to smell the bourbon on his breath.
Yeah, he smelled the bourbon on his breath too. It's 5 o'clock shadow, and he
James
opens.
Clodworthy's doing the voice acting.
He's stumbling to even put his rounds into his 6-shooter, right? So the guy's like, "I got this 600." The sober guy's like, "I got this $600 in me."
Here it comes.
Here it comes. You guys ready? Oh no, it's not that big of a deal. And then so he just draws it from his hip and just fires 3 times, and people are like, "What the heck?" Only one of those even hit the barn. And then he goes, "Hold on, now let's go look at the barn," because he's firing at the side of the barn. So they both saunter over there, or what do people do then? Mosey. They moseyed over there.
Yeah, he moseyed down.
Yeah, definitely moseyed.
Or if you're the one guy who owns a horse in the one horse town, you can ride your horse. But most people mosey.
All right, so one of them's riding a horse, and the other one's moseying.
Yep.
And they get there, and the guy looks at it and goes, "Well, where's your shot?" And he goes, "I'll show you." He picks up a can of paint and he finds his bullet hole and draws a bullseye around it and makes it so that he hit the bullseye. So the point is that
worth it.
How worth is that, guys? Yeah, that was a little long, but
the point of the fallacy is what
is that you draw your field goals after you've kicked your ball, or you throw a lawn dart and then you go find it and say, "I got it." So how would that look here?
You're finding victory by post hoc, right? Like after it's already happened.
And the psychological principle that I work on is confirmatory bias, right? Like once we've been told something, once we go like, "Oh, look, here's blah blah blah, here's the answer," we have a hard time realizing. We look for data that confirm that, and we excuse data that doesn't. So for this example, he's like, "Hey, this is an easy fast game," and I'm like, "Bullshit." Like you're like a StarCraft, for example, has a ton of strategy, but as you pointed out, remember, why did you step away from StarCraft?
There's a difference between having a ton of options and having a ton of feasible options. So one of the problems with StarCraft was there was only 1 or 2 different correct responses, really only one correct response for every move the other person was doing. And by correct response, I mean the optimal way to win, right?
Right.
And so it became less about fluid reasoning and more about memorizing what the correct response is for each scenario that you come into. Much like chess, right? Like there's certain plays you memorize how to beat that opening and then you win the game. And StarCraft to a lesser degree was like that. So even though it seems strategically complex on the surface, the actual real strategy that's happening there didn't feel that high to me.
Right, but in reality, like if you drew it out on a decision tree, it would be huge, right? You got to be like, okay,
very complex.
I send out my scout at minute 6 or whatever, and I'm not going to get too into this. I only go into it when it's an elaborate backstory, and this not so much. So at minute 6, I send out my scout. I go to look, and he
has 1 barrack and 2 reactors or something.
Yeah, or let's say you get to a base position and he's not there, he's at the other one. You're like, shit, I gotta make a decision. And then you have a couple options you have, depending on the minute, how much money you have, gas, resources, and then you go, I gotta make this decision. Because this one is the one that's gonna hedge my bets best against this, and etc. So while any one game never looks like any of the other games, they all kind of start similar and they all end up in a certain vicinities, that kind of thing.
Right. So it becomes like poker players, right? Like they'll see the cards on the table, they'll know what will optimize their chances of winning, and from there it's just a matter of memorizing when to hold and when to fold and when to bluff, right?
But that's exactly it. Everything turns into that. Think about Counter-Strike. There's a reason why I was really good at Counter-Strike for a while, is because it's about minimizing the possibilities, right? Let's say there's 6 different ways the enemy can come out of their area. There's a tunnel over here, there's a tunnel down there, there's a tunnel over here, and there's a back way over here, and they can jump in on the roof. Well, okay, I've got to minimize the chances that I'll get surprised, right? So I fire a couple times to the left to show them that there's opposition. I throw a grenade at the top, I throw a flashbang in the middle, and now I've zoned off 2 things, at least for a few seconds.
Right.
They're not going to come across that just yet. So then I'm like, okay, then I go check those two, and once I check those two, you go back to the one that's immediacy, right?
If you've ever played like a fighting game or Smash Brothers, it's the same principle. You limit the options the other person has, and then you look like a psychic when you predict what they're going to do because you've cut off their other choices.
Exactly. So you say like this master has just like dismantled me, right? Like if you said you played online and I had a similar experience, like I riggedy wrecked, son.
Yeah, like it felt like they were reading my mind and doing what I was going to do right before, like countering every move. It was because they were controlling the space to where they knew what move I was most likely to do because they cut off my other options.
Right. So then when people are like, oh, this is a strategy, even then, like a slow strategy games. Look at chess. First time you play chess, it does seem like there's a lot of strategies you can do.
Possibilities are endless.
Yeah, but you ask a chess master, and I've only known 2 people who are really good at chess, and each time they're like, he can do that, he can do this and this. There, he can do this or that. But that's
right.
Crazy.
This is why they can look at a game that's like 2 turns in and go, okay, you've already lost the game. Here's what will happen.
Yeah, as it turns out, it's not about there's strategy is an illusion, really. I mean, depending if you know exactly what you want and then the person reacts in a certain way, even though it seems incredibly complex, you think that you're strategizing, but once you've done that scenario enough, like the computer figures out the most optimal way. This is called math. So there's a thing called discriminant function, which all it does is it tests all the possibilities, and then it looks at the one that splits the 2 groups the best. Or you can do a variant like this too, where you put all these data points in, and then you get this line of variables that you just threw in, and it puts weights on them. It has the largest predictive factor for whatever you're looking for. Like, what are the chances someone's going to be I almost said gay. Why would I say that? That chances that someone's going to be a good basketball player or going to the NBA, right? And then you're like, I don't know. Let's say free time. Let's say athleticism or initial athleticism. Then we'll say training time. Then we'll say parents' wealth. It doesn't matter about equipment, all that kind of thing. And then it tests everything. It goes, puts weights on larger weights, smaller weights on everything, and eventually it goes, oh, here's the one. With maybe a half, 0.5 here, 2.2 here, 0.1 here. That's the one that predicts best, given the variables you put in, right? So that's the same thing. Like, it looks incredibly complex. You're like, who knows who gets in the NBA? And
strategy looks incredibly complex, and we want to believe it's really complex, but much like free will, sometimes just because we want it to be true and it looks complex doesn't mean it exists.
Exactly. Yeah, and then people say that there's different – this happened to me all the time. Like, remember I used to play StarCraft, or I've played a lot of games before the age of the internet, right? Here's a perfect example. Warcraft 2. You remember that?
Yes, BattleNet, dial-up.
So Warcraft 2 is a predecessor, of course. Why should I even say this? To Warcraft 3.
Oh. That's baffled me, the numbering system. Why would 2 completely different games from 2 different franchises have the same name and a different number? Now
it's weird.
You just blew the lid off of that.
Well, people thought it was random, but it's not.
Well, how does that relate to Warcraft 1, though?
So it's actually the successor to Warcraft 1.
Holy shit!
It's like a Warcraft 1 2. But
okay, all right. I think I'm following.
So you play this game a ton, and then they came out with this new thing called BattleNet Edition. I was like, what the fuck is that? BattleNet is being able to play against others online. And let me tell you, I was the baddest ass Warcraft 2 player amongst many of my friends. But then I get online and I got riggedy wrecked, son. Like, apparently just putting farms in front of your towers. I was like, what's this guy doing? Oh my God, I'm bad at the game. He did that. He did. He had better building management. He would
I've had the same experience when we were at your house in Mississippi, and we were playing Smash Brothers, and I had drank all the whiskey, and I was still destroying. Like, how did you feel about my skill as a Smash Brothers player?
You're the greatest.
Yeah, maybe I should go pro, right? No, then I went online. Turns out I'm average. Sometimes I lose, sometimes I win. It's 50-50.
Right, but the available paths to you or ways to beat someone seem almost limitless, but they begin constricting as you realize, okay, so like, let's put it this way. Some people are like, well, Jeremiah, you're way off track here. But no, because like, let's say this, you're playing Dota or you're playing well, actually, that's too complex. You're playing a fighting game, right? Which is also complex, but only one player. And you sit down and you go, I'm going to be Ryu, right? Or Ryu. I keep saying Ryu, so I'm going to stick with that. Just go American. Ryu.
Yeah. Ryu, America. Ninja Gaiden. So you pick Ryu, and you're like, what's he going to do? Pick Ken? But whoever he picks. If he picks Ken, it means American. Let's pick Guile. That's more American.
Yeah, he needs a cowboy hat. Cowboy Ken. But they pick them. Suddenly, it it's already
Limit the
constricted.
options, yeah.
You're good at it. Yeah, you already have a strategy going in. And, you know, I hear high-level fighting players talk about this. I'm not. I thought I was good at fighting games too. I got fucking wrecked whenever I played a few of them online. But I'm good locally. So, and then they started playing, they were playing Dago. Dago?
I'm good against my little brother and sisters and my cat. I'm pretty good against the cat. Just people
wrecking
in
my 4-year-old.
general vicinity.
Yeah.
My 4-year-old son.
I put the controller on a plant. I wrecked it. No, anyways. So, then I saw some of them in the commentary. They were saying, they're like, well, okay, so he's going to start out with, and they already started saying what he was going to do as the game's loading. They're like, he's going to start off with long range fireballs, and then he's going to go with his short down circle B or whatever and I was like, how the fuck? And then I watched him do it, and I was like, that was awesome. So,
man, sorcery in any good game commentary, you're gonna see it. Like a StarCraft 2 commentator, we used to watch StarCraft 2 matches. They'd always say, okay, well, here's what he's gonna do now because he just saw this, and then he would do it. Or Hearthstone, or Here's the Storm, League of Legends. Good commentators can do that because they've seen that play out so many times. They know what the right answer is.
Right, and I think neglecting the strategy of zone management of fighter games or of Counter-Strike is a complete detriment. I mean, there's a lot of strategy, but it's more nuanced, so people don't understand it. But or they're mislabeling strategy. Hence why I was like, he calls it strategy, but really what he means is complexity of decision making
or meaningful decisions, probably.
Right, and just because it's automatized inside of like Counter-Strike or fighter games, I think that's a complete ridiculous thing to say, considering every little piece. Remember David Sterling talked about complexity of just even when to do your Shoryuken as Ryu, if I remember right, was on his website. And it was like, I mean, it went forever. And I was like, that's incredible. But he's right. Like there are right times to do it, wrong times to do it. And it's not about just what do I want to do now. If you think there's complexity, then you probably don't understand the system.
Right. Which again, it's important when you're reading this graph to look at that and say, okay, the people who put Europa Universalis and these are the people who said, I enjoy games with a lot of strategy. That doesn't mean that it has a lot of strategy. It just means the people who play that game perceive it as having a lot of strategic depth.
Right.
The 143,000 or 140,000 people who responded tended to say, oh, this is a strategic game and I value strategy. And Counter-Strike got very low on that. But what that means is not that Counter-Strike is strategically complex. That would be a bad way of reading the graph. It would just be a way of saying the people who do not value strategy, a lot of them have Counter-Strike as a fair game. And you can do that because you don't have to, like, you can be a non-professional player and just play Counter-Strike for fun. Like, most of my students are idiots. I mean, I'm sorry if you're listening, students, but you're teenagers. But they love Counter-Strike and they don't understand the strategy at all. They just have fun shooting. And so I think a lot of the respondents, it's measuring their preferences more than the game's substance.
Well, it's like explicit learning versus implicit learning. Whenever I talked about that in my thesis and before, God, I keep saying thesis. This is my douchebag episode. But
douchebag.
My thesis. Shouldn't I be drinking brandy right now? But anyway, that's like the most.
Do you know what peat is? Do you know what peat is, Jeremiah? Are you familiar with peat?
Scotch is so good. Okay, but brandy is. I feel that brandy is like one of these things that. You know,
let's do it. Let's have this conversation.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, you're right. So whatever. The point is
let's do it. Let's go ham.
Let's go all in.
Hey, have you considered the merits of Baudelaire over more conventional poets like Wadsworth, but the English poets? I really think Baudelaire's got some things to add to the discussion here, but
I do believe
it because you don't read French is why.
This is the place to do it. This is the place to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's dial back the pretension just a second.
Yeah. Okay. What? I call it geekery more. It's almost like applying their level of nerdery for video games for like brandy. I don't drink brandy, but Scotch for my example.
Right. It's a snobbery. Everyone gets snobby about their hobbies because you love them so much. You're passionate.
Exactly. Yeah. But back to this. It's about
explicit learning versus implicit learning.
Yeah, explicit versus implicit. Just because the strategy that you learned was implicit, you didn't realize you were learning zoning management. You were just doing it, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I knew this guy that played. He played all the Injustice he ever played. This was a fighting game, DC Heroes. Mm-hmm. Was he played fucking baked, just so high. It was this one of my internet friends on PS3. He's like, let me pack a bowl, bro. And I was like, you smoke a lot, sir. Like, I'm not joking. You smoke a lot, but he destroyed
You have a very low likelihood of getting cancer, my friend. Very low.
But he was like you, where he'd be fucked up and he'd wreck me. And so,
there's like a magic point where being fucked up helps sometimes.
Yeah.
Drunken boxing. Drunken
But
master.
the point is that no matter what state this guy is, and no matter what disadvantages I put on him, he could wreck me. And so, yeah, what I was saying is, he may not understand because, well, he's a little inebriated, but either way, he may not understand how he got so good. Whereas the choices you make on a game like Europa or Total War are more explicit. It asks you, it says like, what would you wish to do here? And you have to click a button.
So you feel like you're being strategic because it's explicitly telling you you're being strategic.
Exactly. So I think
the kinds of people who are like, I enjoy strategic games, and Europa is a strategic game.
Right. But I think the most meaningful way or the most helpful way or the most predictive way to organize data around there or the most descriptive way, probably both, but definitely more descriptive, would be explicit versus implicit learners, right? Or people who prefer those sorts of learning. Because sometimes
you would argue that people who like Counter-Strike might actually enjoy strategy and not be cognizant that they are enjoying strategy because they're not thinking about the strategy.
Well, yeah, I think there's super high level strategy. Like if you walk, and I think they understand it too. If you walked up into a fighting game convention, right, and everybody's playing, there's a tournament going on, and I was just like, this game has no strategy, I think I'd get jumped.
Well, right? Sure, but I'm talking again not about the people at the convention who think about the game really hard. Like I didn't think about Smash Brothers very hard until I started reading those articles, and I love Smash Brothers. I'm talking about the rank and file people who love Counter-Strike, the kids in my class, right? They're not thinking like, I'm gonna go play a strategy game tonight. Counter-Strike, you know it. Why would you even ask that? Of course, I just started playing a strategy game. Like they're not thinking of it in those terms. They're thinking of it as a Twitch game. They call it Twitch game or Twitch shooting or first-person shooting or 360 no scopes, bro. But what they don't know is that they are playing a strategy game, and that's why it got ranked low as strategy. Is because they're like, yeah, I don't value strategy. Click, don't value. My favorite game is Counter-Strike, but they do. It's just implicit. They're not explicitly knowing that they're playing a strategy game.
It's just not the most salient variable. They do understand because if you challenge them on it that it is strategic, and they'll begin arguing it. It may be the first time they thought about it, but it's true.
But yeah, it's not what comes to mind when they think strategy.
Right, because they don't understand. I think it's because they don't understand psychology, to be honest with you, because I'm like, no, there's tons of strategy that we're talking about. Like strategy just means like decision making. It's just a little higher pace. And even then that's just variable. It depends on what you're playing. And it depends on how quickly you, because like you can play Rome 2 very quickly. There was a time where I was trying to get to dinner and I was like, click, 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 click. I was making some big decisions, but I kind of knew what I needed to do and I was there. So yeah.
Fun fact, that's how Caesar was assassinated. He was playing Rome too quickly and made some bad decisions.
You're kidding me. Well, that explains so much. Yeah.
So yeah. So your critique is presenting these things as judgments of the game rather than judgments of the people taking the survey.
Both? Well, I think language is a useful tool, and I think it's kind of being hijacked here or gimmicked here a little bit, and I think that's what's organizing these data. And so you see it working, but it's almost like whenever people wave their hand over and do this healing touch therapy. I don't know if you heard about this, but people will hover their hands over people and talk over them, and it works sometimes. And the reason why is because it works on the conscious victims, but it also works if you just...
Let's not jump to conclusions. It might work because of magic, Israel.
It's true. But it doesn't work on the unconscious victims, which makes you think, wow, what's different about the conscious ones? Oh, well, actually, if we bring anyone in there and just start talking and then saying, I'm doing something that works, whether it was, I don't want to get blasphemous, but no matter what it was, of any faith, religion, creed, or belief, like healing crystals, if they gave them that idea of positive, that this will work, a placebo effect, that was all it was working on. The unconscious people couldn't do it. So it's the same thing. This works here, but that's not why they think it works. It's because these people they don't understand the differences. They're not I just feel that it's ganking this. First of all, you're priming these people to think of one thing, so you've already limited them down to an ideal, and then once you're asking them questions and you're like, oh, look how well it organized, and I'm like, well, of course it did. You told them to think of something and then ask them questions about it. And then even when it falls in line, I'm like, that graph isn't really the best way to represent that. I would say this.
So the author, Nikki, he ends this paper with this statement, sort of justifying the when you're writing a paper, you have to justify why this paper needs to exist in the first place.
Yeah.
So he says, whether you're trying to understand the main motivational dimensions of a game genre, or how your game is positioned among related games, we have the data and a repeatable methodology to powerfully visualize the hidden relationships between game titles and audience motivations. Do you think that this data does not point to any relationships between game titles and audience motivations, or do you think he's just overstating how relevant the data is?
Both. And the most important question to me would be to ask, is it predictive of what someone will enjoy? So if someone takes this and they find out, oh, here's where I am, right? They find this little profile. I would take something I would make them play a few different games, but the coolest one to look at would be the one opposite of what they said. But that's obviously going to have the most variance. So I would do ones that approximate it, randomize and do ones that approximate it. And I can't pretty much say this, but my prediction would be that it would, there would be a lot more variance than they understood that they had. And like games like, I mean, if you looked at me, you would be like, well, StarCraft 2, MOBAs now apparently. And, but I love the shit out of Life is Strange, so like if someone's like, if it was predictive, it's like, oh, he wouldn't like this. It's very, very opposite. But then you're like, oh, well, actually he really would. There's no strategy to it. And it's super not exciting as he organized it. But it was my favorite, or one of my favorite games. Same with Ori and the Blind Forest. There was no strategy to it. There was a little mastery at the end, but even my son was playing it. It's
yeah, but it gets pretty platformy. There's a lot of mastery in that.
But that's not what hooked me. Like I was already sold on the game before we got to when it became difficult.
Yeah.
So I think it just it pigeonholes you, which a lot of personality tests do.
It's not measuring. I think part of the problem with the game is it might be a little outmoded in that it doesn't measure. Some games, more modern games, are prioritizing things like art and music and aesthetics that, in a way, not just graphics but aesthetics. Like Ori and the Blind Forest feels like you're in a watercolor. Like, how do you measure that in the questions provided? There was nothing that would predict that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't do it. So the one way that you can collect data is just self-report by asking people, but people don't know, and it depends. What they do is they take an ideal or a prototype, right? Or whenever you ask them, like, do you like birds? They don't go, hold on, ostriches, redbirds.
They go through like every species and then give you an average. Like, I like 64% of birds.
Yeah, then they're like, I don't like ostriches or emus. They scare me, but I do love blue jays, and penguins are really cool. Let's see. I guess I'll take the average. No, what you do is you think of a centroid and you go, oh, birds. Let's see. What's my experience with birds? And you think of one example of your experience with birds.
Birds you saw that day.
Yeah, or the most like meaningful one. But that's called a centroid of different ranges, right? So it's this middle one, this placeholder. And so you draw on that, and it's just not helpful. So instead, you can find ways to trick people. So there are ways to get, like, one of the most predictive things for if someone was a psychopath was on a personality test. What was the most predictive question? It was something like, do you like cake or pie or something? It was, don't quote me on that. It's on the MMPI, which is one of the most validated personality tests, but it was a weird one for that scale. But nonetheless, so there's something called face validity, which means does the question ask what it asks, which is like, do you like marriage? That one's 100% face valid, right? It's asking you, it wants to know, it's measuring how much you like marriage, right?
Sure.
But a question like, do you like pie is not face valid. It's asking if you like pie, but on its face, on its surface, it's asking one thing, but it's actually getting at a whole different thing, right? It was one of the most predictive questions for psychopathy. So that's interesting, right? So and as it turns out, that's the best way to figure people out, because people can't game your system. They can't trick you. Those are the measures that I always prefer whenever I put assessment batteries up. People are like, what the fuck did I just take? And I'm like, it doesn't matter. It's highly predictive. So like ADHD, for example, if you ask people, do you get distracted? People are coming in and paying you $400 to determine if they get distracted. Yeah, they're going to say yes. But instead you ask questions that sound right that aren't. And then they go, yeah. And then you're like, oh, okay, you actually don't fit then. No people with ADHD answered yes on that. So sorry. I like those because it's
hard to game.
So that's what I would do here. I would look at questions. I would throw a ton of questions in, and then I would look at ones that organize people around these things, like maybe meaningful questions, or how do you like to spend your time, your spare time meaningfully? And then that might predict them playing the game, because a lot of people might like video games, but they only find it meaningful to master something or to become better in competition. Like that might be a good question to look at, and it would give you a genre of games, that kind of thing. So it doesn't matter. Like I would use math. And this guy didn't use theory. There's two different ways to do these. You can put them together by theory, which is like, if I ask these questions, they'll probably give the right answer. Or then there's math, which is, it doesn't matter what I'm asking. I'm just going to take the one that predicts the best. And then you get weird batteries, but they always work amazingly. So,
but in this case, how would you know what predicts the best without some data to look from? Because it's not like there's a database of people who love like artsy games like Ori. It's not like ADHD where there's other ways you can test. And you're like, oh, this one predicts the most people with ADHD because it did, and we know that from other data. Like we don't have other data points here.
I'm doing that right now in my dissertation. You throw a ton of questions out. It's called focus groups, right? And you get like the N of maybe, it depends on how many questions you ask. There's a way to figure out how many people you need to ask. But let's say you get 200 here, 200 here, 200 here, 200 here, and you got them all different variations of answers or questions. And then you just start looking at the ones that start predicting actual behaviors, right? So not just self-report, because then you're tying self-report to self-report, and then who cares? Like my favorite game is this. Oh, I reported these characteristics. Great. But is it predictive? Who knows? Does the person actually play mostly those games?
Right. So I guess what I'm wondering is how do you know if it's predictive without, like, did you look at their Steam library and see what games they've played the most often? Like, where would that data come from?
That would be a great one, a behavioral one like that, where you make them tell you something not based off of recall, but you measure something explicitly. That's what I did for my thesis. Remember, I tricked people. I said, oh, hey, will you organize these photos? And they did, and it turns out that's a huge predictor of aggression. The way that the photos you want to expose to someone, which is weird. You wouldn't think that, but it's internationally standardized across nations, and it's got a huge predictive value. Weird, right? But asking them if they're aggressive was wholly not predictive, which is also kind of weird. And then I tricked them by saying, oh, the thing's done, you can go. And then someone in the parking lot grabbed them and said, hey, you willing to do volunteer work? And that was part of the thing. So that's how I would do it.
But you knew going into that test that the photos would predict that, right? Like you didn't just happen upon that coincidentally. You knew at some point that the photos arranged a certain way would predict violence or aggression.
What do you mean? Oh, yeah.
So what I'm wondering is, like, in this specific instance with like trying to predict what kind of game somebody would like, how would you find those kind of innocuous activities that would predict those games, considering that we don't have that battery of research?
Well, it would depend. I mean, you'd have to change your methodology. So if this was an online survey, you would have to say something like just straight going into it, like probably 3 weeks before or 2 weeks before, and just say upload your Steam library, just like a list of it, maybe a text list. And then 2 weeks later, once the priming effect's gone or whatever, then just say, hey, remember that 2 week callback? This is it. What kind of games do you like? And then ask that. And then switch those around. Half the participants you ask like that, and half the participants you ask the questions, and then have them do their Steam library 2 weeks later. That's called ABAB or ABBA. And then you see if that interaction effect of which one you asked first will change something. Now, 2 weeks apart, it probably won't, but immediately like this, I guarantee it will. So that's an interesting question too. See which one minimizes bias. But yeah, you can do that. You can do tons of behavioral measures. You could make them play a simple game based on like, the different ideals, and then ask the questions, and then vice versa for the ABBA, and then see which one of those is most predictive, that kind of thing. Or let me see. I trick them. I use deception in everything I do, because people will predict their shit and they will fuck with it. So I trick them. Like, ask them something totally come out of left field, like hey, like maybe have them coming in and then saying like, hey, do you guys want to be on a hey, you got the chance to win a free video game? And then they're like, what? And you're like, yeah, from GameSpot down the way. And, it's just a regular college kid. You hire a regular college kid to do this, and then say, so check which one of these boxes do you be interested in? They're like, oh, okay, check, right? That's implicitly tapping into that. They don't have any organizing data. They're just looking at games and recognition. They're just clicking whatever they want on there. And say you can only pick, well, I wouldn't say you can only pick 5. But I guess you'd have to mix up the lists. But you get the point. The point is,
I just think there's a lot more groundwork than in a more researched field. Like with violence, you already have those little hacks like the photo thing that you can fall back on.
Yeah.
With this one, you really would have to you'd almost have to change the way you, and maybe your criticism is that no one's willing to put the resources in to do that kind of science except for you on your thesis currently. But or people in the field that are doing it. Like, there are people starting to research video games seriously, but the kinds of like survey data is just cheap and easy to do. So I think that's why we see most of it is it's just hard to get that initial kind of data set.
Well, and it's true that it does take a little extra work, but I wouldn't say it's that much. Like we do it in a weekend, but it does take a little more dedication. But if you're not willing to do that, don't put out the data. Like, don't say this is true if you don't know if it's true. I would say, hey, I did this weird thing and it came up weird. I have no idea if it predicts anything, but it's fancy. Like that's what I think I would be interested in. But instead, people are like looking at this and going, hey, this looks like me. And I'm like, it's horoscope effect. We call it the Barnum and Bailey effect. It's
right.
Where you see it, you go, yeah, that's mostly true. But if you challenge the person to think of counterexamples, of course they're going to be able to think of them. Unless they just started gaming, they just don't know.
So that kind of transitions into with this personality thing. It actually recommends games based on what you answered, like what kind of games that you value, what you think you value, or what you reported that you valued. So I thought it would be fun to look through the list it gave me and see which ones I like, which ones I hate, which ones I've never heard from, and see how accurate this horoscope is. Like, is this one of those things where I'm ignoring the misses and just focusing on the hits, or what?
There you go. That's what I was going to say. Use Bayes' theorem. Also think of ones that you like that it did not predict.
Right.
And that it would not predict. And then compare all those numbers.
Mm-hmm. Although I don't know what it would not predict because I don't know what its criteria is, but I do know what it did predict.
What you liked that's not on the list, yeah. Then.
So The Secret World, that was a game that JT and I played for a little while. I played it for about a solid weekend, and I got bored with it. And that was the first recommendation. So I'm going to count that one as a miss. I liked it for a while, but it didn't really stick with me.
All right.
Pillars of Eternity, that's a Baldur's Gate kind of clone that I've looked at, and I just gave it a hard pass. I'm not really that into that game at all.
Okay. So false positives, right? That's what these are.
Mm-hmm. So these would be two no's for me, probably 2 passes. If someone was like, "You want to play this game?" I'd be like, "Nah, not really." The Sims 3, I did play that game a lot. I put a lot of hours into it. I'm not into it anymore, but I think a game that I spent that much time having fun with probably deserves to be on this recommendation list.
Sure.
Myst series, did you ever play that?
Yeah.
I didn't. It didn't really seem, I don't know. I didn't have the patience for all the puzzles. So I kind of passed on it. Maybe I would have liked it if I'd played it, but that's going to be a question mark for me because it didn't catch my fancy. Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney. That game looks fun, but I've never played it, so I guess it's another pass. So far we've got 2 passes, 1 hit, and 2 misses. Splatoon, loved it. That's a hit. Xenoblade Chronicles, currently playing it, loving it. That's a hit. Guild Wars series. Well, how would you measure this one, Jeremiah?
I don't know. That's what I was going to say in the beginning. Like, when you're doing Bayes' theorem, you got to do false positive, true positive, false negative, true negative. So, and then also you've got to have criteria to know what's going to count yes. And I was like, this is just difficult. There's different games like Sims, for example. Did you like it? Like, if beforehand. Anyway, yeah.
Well, it says recommendation, so I'm just gonna read this as games somebody would recommend, and I would feel like, oh, that was a fun game. I'm glad I played it.
Cool.
So yeah, Guild Wars, I don't regret playing it. I'm not into it anymore, but I played it for a long time. I probably put like 60 hours on that game, 70 hours.
Cool.
Animal Crossing series. Longtime listeners will know that I had a bit of a problem with that game for a long time. I was a bit addicted to it. So yeah, that's probably a pretty solid recommendation. The Elder Scrolls Online, that's a solid no. I played that game, did not like it at all. Oh,
and I feel bad because we got free in because of some of our listeners.
Yeah, I really wanted to like it. I had every intention of liking it, and I just did not. SimCity. I enjoyed SimCity 2000, but I was a kid, so I don't know if that really, it might be too old to count anymore. I haven't played any SimCity games recently.
Right.
Fire Emblem, one of my favorite series of all times.
Yeah,
so that's a hard hit. Tales of Symphonia, never played. Gonna ignore that. Mass Effect 3, really liked it. Journey, never played. Earthbound series, another one of my all-time favorite games. Star Wars: The Old Republic, really enjoyed. And Life is Strange are on the list. So real quickly, you can just track the data yourself. Secret World, no. Pillars of Eternity, no. Sims 3, yes. Myst, doesn't matter. Splatoon, yes. Xenoblade, yes. Guild Wars, yes. Animal Crossing, yes. Elder Scrolls, no. SimCity doesn't count. Fire Emblem, yes. Tales of Symphonia doesn't count. Mass Effect 3, yes. Earthbound, yes. Star Wars, yes. Life is Strange, yes. Journey, never played.
Now, the interesting thing too is we need one more variable here to really look at it like complexly with good math. But that would be like, what are the base rate of yeses and nos for each of those as well? Like I imagine a lot of people would say SWTOR, yes, maybe not. But then a lot of people would say Myst, no, maybe. But I'd need to know the base rate. So because it's not impressive if someone goes, I bet you liked Star Wars: The Force Awakens. You're like, well, yeah. I'm like KOTOR. You're like, of course I did. Yeah. So I'm impressed. I would be most impressed by the ones that are very unlikely picks. And I would be not very impressed by the ones that are very likely picks. So that's how you do base theorems. You look at the base rates.
Yes.
But we can't.
Sadly don't have access to.
Yeah.
But, just from my non-base theorem, non-scientific approach, I'd say, 2/3 of the ones that they thought I liked. And then about a third of them I either didn't like or hadn't played.
Okay. Yeah. So it's warm. It's a warm theory so far.
which is really all I can do without more data.
Yeah.
But it's useful for what I want, which is if I want a game like, oh, you know what? I might try, what's a game I haven't played? Tales of Symphonia. I've heard good things about it, never gotten around to playing it, but it might be on that, majority of games that it recommended that I liked.
It sounds like, just based off our rough statistics, that it's 66% likely you will.
And I'll enjoy it. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that's pretty cool. Maybe I will take that thing. It's like it'd be like for you if you started to read a French book or watch a French movie and they started butchering it right out of the way, just right out of the gate. They were like they said, how do you do? And they go, comment tu fais? You'd be like, oh, that's not what I.
Yeah, you just describe my job professionally. I hear people butcher French in the worst accents and the worst grammatical structures, and I just have to smile and say, "Good job," but you did this wrong.
Oh, and it's yeah, and it's everything I'm against is bad science, and especially when it gains popularity. I'm like, no, we need more good science. People are getting thrown up for a whack again. It's like when somebody takes essential oils, it pisses me off. I'm like, the aromatherapy is what that's based on, and that's considered a junk science. Like, it kind of works, but only as much as anything pleasant smelling. You can put up an apple pie in front of someone, and they go, that makes me feel a little better.
Right.
But it's that kind of thing.
I think this, again, I think a lot of the problem with not just this study, but just science in general and psychology in general, is that it's way cheaper to get data from 140,000 people by online survey than by stopping them by GameStops and doing an elaborate charade where they're going to win a game. You can get 20 or 30 people for the price of 140,000 people through a survey. And so even though it's worse science, it's cheaper and easier to do. So it tends to be what people do in psychology. Not all psychologists, not all psychology, but that tends to be a trend that I've noticed.
I think that's a myth. I used to think that good science was hard, but it's not. It's just careful.
Right, but don't you think it would take more time and money to do what you were talking about than to program a web page and have 143,000
No,
people?
you can do a power analysis, and this shocked even some of the scientists in our division. I did I gathered information from 28 people, and it had enough to do a multivariate statistic. There's math based on this, like how much covariation you have. There's a lot of questions you need to know. But
so what you're saying is, it doesn't matter the number. Like if you had a tiny percent of the data responses that he did, but it doesn't matter, it's still going to be reliable findings.
Well, if you're to set up your structures, right? So I won't go all into it, but yes, just to figure out what questions you need to ask, it could be as little as 25 people. It could be a weekend. It's just not that hard. And so you just have to know how to do a power analysis, which is a little more advanced math, and then you have to know what's appropriate for the specific statistic that you're going to run, a specific math. So if you know that, most people don't know, so they just go for huge numbers because
that's really counterintuitive. Because what you're saying to me, and I'm gonna trust you because this is your field, but what you're saying to me, and this is why I'm repeating it to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, is that with 28 people, you could have as reliable findings as with 143,000 if you do the math right.
Now, I will explain this to you. Do you want me to do it online or offline? Because it's going to get dry. But I will. Just trust me. I'll tell you about it. Yeah, I'd love talking about this.
All right. Anyone that wants to hear about that, send us an email, and we will email you the explanation for why that works. But for now, we'll just take your word on it.
Yeah, I had the exact same question for my thesis. I was like, this can't be right, John. I just ran these numbers. And he's like, that's right. I'm like, no. And he's like, yep. And then I had to defend it in front of a thesis board where they called bullshit too, and I had to pull up all the studies and then show why the math worked. And they're like, oh, okay. And then we had to get a statistics professor in there to say, oh, yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, and because it doesn't make sense. You're like, what? But I'll show you because I had to show them as well.
Okay, so what you're saying is it's a myth that you need big numbers to get accurate data, and therefore the fact that people do that is more of a misunderstanding of how numbers work than an intrinsic weakness in resources.
Yeah, it's okay. I'll sum it up real small. The fact that you're required to have in all cases a huge N is false, or a huge number of people is false. It depends on what you're measuring and how much covariation you have. Oh, geez. Okay. So how similar are they? It depends. Let me put it that way. There's a huge variation. It could be 25 people and you could answer big questions with lots of variables, or it could be hundreds of thousands. But if you skew too large, you run the risk of seeing differences when they're not there because you just get natural collections of data. But if you get too few, you run the risk of not seeing it when it's clearly there. So there's a way to look at that mathematically and say, okay, what am I measuring? How so much collinearity and how much covariation do I have inside of these data points? And then how will I be able to detect if they're
And
separate?
so measuring those data points, like knowing the collinearity, that's going to protect you against sampling errors and things like that.
Yes. Yeah, shortly, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I won't get too much.
Just leave it there.
Okay.
But what you're saying is, for the same amount of resources, you could have a more accurate finding using fewer responders.
For way less. This guy went ham on his number, which is fine, but I'm just saying. He's much more likely to run into a higher risk of seeing differences when they're not there.
Okay.
But depending on what he did. Anyway, you get the idea. The point is you can do it easier, right?
Okay.
If you wanted to. So hence why I get kind of when I see it.
That is not something I was aware of. So I learned
super boring today. You're welcome.
Thanks. Thanks, science.
An exciting note.
Yeah, we started off with an Sarkeesian and we ended up with covariant variables. So definitely had a curve of excitement to math.
Yeah, we rode that one right into the ground, didn't we?
Hey, well, how about this? I'm going to name a fallacy, and you come up with a fun story about why that fallacy is.
It was the greatest. I stretched that out.
Okay, so no true Scotsman, right? All right, so there's this group of Scotsmen.
Right.
And
let me tell you about their clan history.
Their names are Angus. I'm going to get on their names first because you got to relate to these Scotsmen before you understand
families.
The fallacy. Yeah, they're from 4 different clans, but it's kind of like Game of Thrones. There's a very complex backstory about how they relate to each other. But I can go into it in 6 novels. But the punchline is there's no true Scotsman.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, sorry about that, people.
So fun.
Making narratives, man. It's part of my way to help people remember information, but
yeah, no, I'm sure. There's probably at least one person who had never heard of that fallacy, and they'll never forget it now.
And then there's hundreds that are now hating.
Hundreds. Yes, we know. We've been on the internet before. We know how things work. That's fine. You guys have a fun story, or at least you can laugh at us. So,
yeah.
Either way, you win.
All right, but with that said, I think maybe we need to sign off. We've got some things. We are rushing this in on a Friday because we have a lot of things we need to do.
Yep, it'll be Sunday for you guys though, because I'm not putting it up till it's supposed to be up.
All right, well, cool. Thanks for joining us for another one. Go check out the Facebook page if you haven't been there. Great discussions, great people. If you're a turd, stay away from it because apparently it's only angels there.
It's not for turds. We're gonna discriminate against turds.
I love saying turds. Like
no, it sounds like a watch out, turd, like the Hey Arnold.
Yeah. Facebook.com/groups/Game
Theory Podcast. One word.
Yeah, and just request to join. It's auto approved pretty much, unless you look at the picture and it's like some busty cam girl with like that just started her account and
then
it's
like super auto approved because we don't have enough cam girls that are credit card scams.
Then you'll just get friended.
And I'll wonder, like, why do you keep posting asking for my credit card? That's weird. But you were friends, so yeah, here it is.
Yeah, we're friends. All right. But yeah, go join that. You can follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/GameTheoryPod. I don't do much on there. I'll be straight up honest with you, but I do answer questions and when people interact, I interact back. So yeah, finally could send us an email through the old internet snail mail nowadays because
it's not as fast as Gmail. Or as Twitter.
Yeah. The Game Theory Podcast @gmail.com. So everyone else, thanks for listening. We really appreciate it. And thanks for contributing to our community.
Yes. And if you want to learn why all that math stuff works, just send us an email.
Yeah, send us an email. I'll be glad to go over it with you. So yeah. And thanks for listening. We'll see you guys next week.